Psalm 56. Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me. All day long an attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample on me all day long, for many attack me proudly. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? All day long they injure my cause. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They stir up strife, they lurk. They watch my steps, as they have waited for my life. For their crime will they escape? In wrath cast down the peoples, O God. You have kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your books? Then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God, whose word I praise. In the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? I must perform my vows to you, O God. I will render thank offerings to you, for you have delivered my soul from death, yes, my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. Psalm 56 is one of my favorite psalms. And it's one of my favorite psalms because in a particularly dark season of my own life, I remember one morning we'd started the practice of working through the Psalms in the morning and the evening. And we were on the day for Psalm 56. And for one reason or another, as I was praying through and reading through Psalm 56, the line that occurs at the end of verse 9 just stuck in my throat as a prayer. The line that says, "This I know, that God is for me." And it was a season where it was hard to believe that. It was hard to trust that. There were all kinds of just trouble, just massive trouble. And in the midst of it, that line became something that I clung to. I found myself that morning actually weeping as I began to believe and to trust and to hold on to in the glorious declaration that I may not know a whole lot of things, but I know this, that the God of the universe, the God who's redeemed me and rescued me in Jesus, is for me. And so Psalm 56 is precious to me. And I think in Psalm 56, it could be precious to you. The circumstance of Psalm 56 is that the psalmist is being trampled. He's surrounded by trouble. He's being accused of things. He's being mocked. He's being attacked by those surrounding him. In the midst of it, he first opens with a confession. After kind of declaring the situation around him, in verse 3, he says, "When I'm afraid, I put my trust in you." And so he's afraid. So the first thing you need to know is, it's okay to be afraid. But in the midst of that fear, God calls us in that moment. The psalmist actually here instructs us to trust God, to put your trust in Him. And you can trust Him for two reasons. First, as he says here, because of the sheer power and immensity of who God is. If God is for me, who can be against me? In God I trust. What can flesh do to me? In other words, I'm going to bring my case before God, because at the end of the day, what man can do to me, what men's words can do to me, what men can do to me, is limited. In the end, that they're under and subservient to the sovereign power of God. And so in the end, I trust in God first because He's powerful, He's glorious, He's sovereign over the purposes of men, over the incompetencies of men, or the evil of men, or whatever the purposes of men might be. At the end of the day, God is sovereign, and so I can trust in Him because in the end of the day, whatever man can do to me is nothing compared to the sovereign power of God. But now the second part, and this is what struck me that particular morning, and frankly every month when I get to this psalm, it breaks me in a beautiful and new and good way. The nearness of God and the love of God. And so in verse 8 it says, "You keep count of my tossings." I don't know if you've ever gone through seasons where you just can't sleep. Life is hard. And not just that you can't sleep, but life is hard. You're scared. There's anxiety kind of haunting and hanging over you. Man, what a precious thing to know in that moment. That the nights where you can't sleep, you're just tossing back and forth. Or maybe you're finding yourself with tears and weeping. And the psalmist confesses here that the nature of this sovereign and glorious and massive God is that he keeps count of how many times you turn over in the night. He collects your tears. He keeps track of them. Man, what a glorious thought. That the God of the universe, the God who's sovereign over everything, that no man's purposes can thwart, that no man's evil will can thwart. In the end, he rules over all. But this same God keeps track of the number of times you turn over in your bed at night because of fear or anxiety or sorrow. The same God keeps track of your tears. And there is, in that moment for us, this call, this precious call to believe how all the gifts of God in the Bible are given to us by faith, by believing. To believe that this I know, God is for me. This God who keeps track of my tossings, this God who keeps track of my tears. I mean, he's God even in the midst of, perhaps even particularly in the midst of the most difficult circumstances, the circumstances that would lead you to toss and turn at night, the circumstances that would lead you to weep, when it seems like everything is lost. In that moment, there is a call to confess and to believe, this I know, God is for me. He loves me, he knows me, and he is bending his sovereign will for the purposes of my good. And they may not feel like that. You may have trouble believing that as you look at those circumstances. But the call to God in Scripture is to look away from your circumstances and to see and to trust, despite your circumstances, that God is for you. And maybe not just despite your circumstances, but in the midst of your circumstances, that God is for you. I love this psalm. And I commend it to you as one to memorize, to think on, to meditate on, to pray. And if you find yourself in a particularly dark season, to just sit on this psalm over and over and over again, to think through it, to pray through it, to feel your way through it. Because here that the psalmist teaches us to confess something, no matter what we feel, to confess in the depths of our bones that this God, this sovereign and glorious and covenant-loving God, is for me.